So have you ever made a purchase where you're trying to justify that it was the right choice, but you know deep down it actually might not have been? Well, to be honest, that's how I'm feeling about the R6 right now. And here's why. When I first got the R6 last year, I was raving about it and doing several videos about how great I thought it was. But now after having it for over a year and having some actual real shooting experience with it, I'm feeling a little disappointed with my purchase. To start off, let's address the elephant in the room, and that is overheating. Everybody who knows about the R6 and the R5 knows that they have overheating problems. Supposedly there's firmware update that's helped that, but I can tell you from real shooting situations that I've had, it actually is a real problem. Last summer, I dealt with 2 different shoots where this camera was having overheating issues. One was for a lengthy CK production shoot we did on a hot day. We had a lot of stuff that we were gonna film that day, a lot of different scenes that we were doing, and multiple times throughout the day, I was getting the overheating warning with this camera and it would shut off in order to cool down. Basically, we were forced to take 5-10 minute breaks many times throughout the day for the camera to cool down, only to allow it to shoot maybe for 1 or 2 more minutes until it had to stop and cool down again. This caused us to get really behind in our shooting schedule, and actually we had to scrap an entire scene that we're gonna shoot that day. It was really frustrating, and there was a lot of people on set. I felt like we were letting them down by getting behind with the camera not performing the way it should be performing. Another situation where I dealt with overheating was a wedding over the summer. It was another hot August Pennsylvania day, and I had planned on shooting with this camera throughout the entire day, shooting in 4K resolution, 60 frames per second, like how I normally would for a wedding. But not that far into the day, maybe an hour into it, I was already getting that overheating message. I had to say screw it and switch to shooting in 1080 for the rest of the day. And that's not what I wanted to do. That's not the resolution I wanted to deliver to the client. It's really essential in today's filmmaking market to be able to shoot in 4K resolution and then shoot in high frame rates as well, and be able to do that throughout the entire shoot day. And it's really a shame and it's really disappointing that this camera is unable to do that in some situations. I thought this wasn't going to be an issue before I purchased the camera. I heard that firmware updates had helped the camera from having these issues, but I can tell you from actual shooting experience that I've had, it really has been an issue. And often in these types of shoots, you have a lot of people that are depending on you and depending on your equipment and frankly paying you for your equipment to work properly and for you to deliver a good quality product that you're advertising. It's just such a letdown to feel like you can't achieve that because of shortfalls with the equipment that you're using. This one's just a real bummer to me. The next reason is the file format of this camera. Now this camera and several other mirrorless cameras that are similar to this shoot in a format called H.265. It's a more advanced version of H.264, thus the 5. So unfortunately, it's a file codec that most editing systems haven't quite figured out yet. Because of this, it requires me to either do proxies or to transcode all of my footage. That can be a long, lengthy process and take up a lot of hard drive space, especially if I'm shooting a wedding. In order to edit, I need to spend hours of transcoding where, normally I'd be able to use those hours to start working on the edit. I just really wish these programs would be able to handle this codec better, or if the cameras had an option to shoot in a more traditional format that they're used to. Something's gotta give eventually, right? Next up is the battery life. Now this isn't a huge one, but it is something to consider if you're going to buy this camera. It definitely chews through batteries quicker than other cameras its size and other cameras in the past, really. So not only do you have to deal with the overheating issues with this camera, you also have to deal with going through batteries pretty quickly too, when working in those higher resolutions, which is it's just crazy. Now, any filmmaker knows you should always have extra batteries on set.
Batteries, oh batteries.
But it can be a little bit difficult having to prepare 4-5 different batteries. And not to mention, can also get pretty pricey, especially when these more expensive Canon batteries are really the only ones that get you any sort of value out of it. Luckily, if you are coming from most Canon DSLRs, they would have already been using these batteries. Save those batteries and add them to your library of batteries for this camera. For the all-day shoot you use with this camera, unless the camera overheats and then you can't use it at all. Next up is the screen. Now, this screen actually is pretty good. I really like that it switches out and it can swivel. The problem I have with it is it's just too small, and it's not that high quality of a screen. I often found myself having a hard time telling what's in focus when I'm using it just because of the quality of the screen. What happens is that results in me not getting the shot that I wanted to originally, or getting a lower quality shot than I was intending to. The last thing about the screen to me is it just feels a little bit dated. The way it's set up, the UI and everything, it feels like I'm using a T4i again, honestly. And the last thing on this list is the RF sensor in this camera. Canon made a change of sensors when they moved on to mirrorless cameras. They changed it from an EF lens to an RF lens, and they created a whole new line of new camera lenses to go with that. But for someone like me who doesn't have any RF lenses, or didn't want to spend all the money on these new RF lenses because the prices of them are just insane, I ended up getting just an electronic adapter so I could use my old EF lenses on it. But you know, the problem with that is I'm spending more money to use older technology on these cameras, when eventually I know that I'm gonna have to upgrade to these RF lenses at some point. There aren't any cheaper third-party alternatives right now. It's really going to take some considerable planning for me in the future to decide where I'm gonna go next. But considering all of these reasons, do I seriously regret buying this R6? Maybe a little bit, but not completely. The truth is, I've had a lot of successful shoots with this camera. I put a lot of good products and shot a lot of good footage with it, and a lot of good photos with it. I've had good experiences with this camera. The biggest problem for me, and for me personally, is the camera that I came from before this. I used to shoot on a Canon C100 Mark II, which is a completely different camera than this. That is a cinema camera, and I personally enjoyed using cinema cameras. But the problem with cinema cameras, it takes a high price point to get a 4K cinema camera, and 4K is something that you need to shoot with, and 4K is affordable for things like mirrorless cameras. But for me, you know, going from a cinema camera to a mirrorless camera, I'm giving up a lot of things that I liked. I'd gotten used to having focus peaking. I had gotten used to having long battery life, file formats that were low size, and I could use right out of camera. It didn't quite feel like I was progressing with my new purchase. And if I hadn't had gone from a cinema camera to a camera like this, I probably would have a different reaction to using this camera, probably a more positive reaction, you know, besides the overheating issue. Like, seriously, come on, Canon. Now, will I sell this to get something new? Maybe. I mean, the Canon R5C certainly is intriguing because it has a built-in fan, but that does come with a hefty price point with it too. So maybe sticking with the setups I have right now is gonna be okay, until I'm at a point where I can better afford a more expensive setup, or to be able to switch to a whole another brand completely if I feel that is necessary because of the issues Canon continuously has with the products that they push out. It really can be frustrating because there's a lot of stuff I've really loved about the Canon cameras, but it seems like with every new product they put out, there is some kind of exception, there is something that they're just unable to get right that the other companies don't seem to have a problem with. If these pitfalls are something that you can get past, then the R6 is definitely a good camera for you to use. Most importantly, because of its decent price point. It's definitely cheaper than some of the competitors out there. And if you can't, well, maybe switch to Sony.